Hello and welcome to this edition of Bayou Time. I'm your host, Keith Whiteside, licensed clinical social worker with Terrebonne Home Care. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate it very, very much. I am very glad to be joined with two of our educators who have made a huge difference in our area, both for those of us who are colleagues and certainly for all of the kids. But they're a part of the Terrebonne 200 and especially the Education Committee. As we welcome in David Boudreau, recently retired. Welcome to the program.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
All right. Sitting next to him is Mr. Philip Martin, who is also recently retired. Welcome, Philip.
Nice to be here. Thank you, Keith.
And listen, I know that you guys learned a whole lot about this, but y'all had a lot to give. So, David, if you don't mind, kind of start us off with the history of where things have started. And I know we're going to talk mostly about private schools and the Catholic schools, and Philip will tell us a little more about the public schools. But tell us a little bit about that history.
Yeah, there's a lot of overlap in public and private, especially at the beginning. And I learned a great deal serving on this committee of things. I've lived here for 40 years that I actually didn't know. And the interesting thing I really didn't realize is that there were many schools in this area. Most of the plantations had their own school, Ellender Plantation. You just name all the plantations, and almost every bayou region had their own school. Now, most of these schools were one-room schoolhouses.
Small.
That it was very small, but it just showed that the people in the Terrebonne area valued education, that there was a school in every area. And it brings us to 1858, actually, when a number of people, and 4 of the 6 gentlemen that incorporated this school were either mayors, past mayors, or future mayors of Houma. Wow. So these were business people. They wanted to create something more than a one-room schoolhouse. And so on the corner of Point Street and Barrow Street, there we are. That's the location.
Current picture.
That's the current picture now.
Of Point and Barrow.
And they built what was called Houma Academy at the time. It was a private school. It was non-sectarian. There it is, superimposed there.
Right.
That's exactly where it stood. And the interesting fact I didn't know was that was the architect was Henry Howard, the same architect that built Maidwood and the Pentalba apartment buildings on the sides of Jackson Square in New Orleans.
Wow.
So they hired a top-flight architect to build at the time what was a state-of-the-art school.
And huge. It was a huge school,
compared to
right?
the other schools, it was huge. And it was successful at first, but then you had the Civil War, the police jury in Terrebonne Parish. It wasn't a school board yet. They opened a free public school downtown, not far from current St. Francis.
Okay.
And with that competition, that original Houma Academy went out of business in 1868. They had a debt of $3,500. Sounds like a little bit now. Back then, it was a lot of money.
Yeah, that's a whole lot in today's terms.
Actually, the Maronites of Holy Cross, as well as St. Francis Parish, they picked it up they got a bargain on the property and the building, and they brought in the Maronites of Holy Cross to run the first Catholic school. It was actually called Our Lady of the Sacred Heart, its first few years, and then later in 1879, the name was changed to St. Francis de Sales Academy. So that's how the first, more or less permanent private school actually started in the area.
And I think we have a picture of that as well, right?
Yes, right there. That's from Point Street, and Judge Randy Bethencourt Judge Bethencourt actually attended that school, and so we found these pictures, and we used that culvert to find exactly where that school existed. So that would have been the front, as you can see on the arches of St. Francis de Sales Academy, that existed there until 1965.
And go back to the previous picture, Jen, if you don't mind. You can see that culvert is in the same place, that drain. So that's exactly where that school was. I appreciate you and Judge doing that. So very cool. And again, St. Francis, they changed that to that name in 1879.
Exactly.
Wow, very cool. And so a lot of stuff going on with the public schools then too, right?
Yes, Keith. As David pointed out, most of the schools at that time were very small. In 1850s, there was 13 schools.
Okay, so about the same time, 1850, only
1850, there's 13
schools.
public schools. if you fast forward to 1886, there are 43 public schools. Now, what I find somewhat interesting is that that's more public schools than we have now. What's also interesting, of 43 schools, we have 34 schools with 18,000 kids. There was 43 schools with 1,000 kids. As David pointed out, they were very small. Each little community,
Right.
and there was to be exact, there was 26 white schools and 17 African American schools.
26 and
Now,
17.
most of those
43.
schools have been lost to history. And where were they?
Right.
The names of them. Now, we have a lot of those records in the school board office, and if someone really wanted to do a lot of archival research, could probably get all of that.
Right.
But I found it very interesting that, and we have pictures showing some of these schools that existed that no one even remembers. They're not even anybody's recollection. But 43 schools scattered throughout the parish in the late 1880s, and with 1,000 kids. So that kind of demonstrates what David pointed out.
Right.
They were very small. Your traditional back in the day of one room school. Right.
And more importantly, it followed those kids all the way up through their graduation.
Well, exactly. And with 1,043 kids, one of our high schools has more kids than
More kids than that, exactly.
Than the entire school system. So puts
very,
things in perspective.
Right. So very unique and interesting. David, take us back again, if you don't mind. Let's go to turn of the century and some of the things here in the early 1900s about some of the changes taking place with education.
Well, of course, Terrebonne Parish began to grow.
Right.
Okay. As the population rose, and the need for education rose also. So, actually, in the Catholic schools, by 1918, there was a need to educate the young men, because the school actually opened as a school for girls.
Okay,
so
that's right.
in 1918, the boys were transferred to an old building, which is where the rectory is today on St. Francis Catholic Church property.
Okay.
So the boys were transferred there. Another non-public school called Lawton Preparatory opened on Liberty Street. I had never heard of that school until we started this kind of research. And like Philip said, there are a number of schools that popped up, and they came and they went, and there's little or no record of those. There are a
Right.
couple of pictures of the graduates of Lawton. It was a very small school.
Okay.
And then actually in 1952, okay, that was a big year for the Catholic schools, because the current building of St. Francis Elementary School, that school opened in 1952, and the girls and the lower grades were really relocated there.
Okay.
On that campus.
From the property on Point Street.
Exactly.
Okay.
Well, now, what did they do with the old St. Francis Academy on Point Street? Well, what they did, they contacted the Brothers of the Sacred Heart, okay, a religious order that had very successful schools in New Orleans, in Donaldsonville, Bay St. Louis. The brothers are worldwide, okay, educators. So in 1952, the brothers came in to operate the boys' school on the Point Street location. Also, it's important to note that in 1947, St. Matthew's Episcopal actually opened up their school for the first time, and they started with kindergarten,
Okay.
and then expanded from there.
And
So
grew from there.
that takes us into the 50s, and those schools operated like that until the mid 60s, and we'll talk a little bit about that later.
Very good. Philip, tell us a little bit about where things got started. One of my favorite schools and where it started in our area in 61.
The first high school in the parish was Terrebonne High School.
Right.
Opened 1909. In the current building, it opened 1940. There were two Terrebonne Highs before that.
Right.
But the building that's in right now, 1940, is and Terrebonne High was the first accredited high school in the state of Louisiana. A lot of people don't know that.
I didn't know that either. Got to give credit to those Tigers.
It's been around for a while, and it's my alma mater, but it's also our flagship.
Sure.
Because it's senior high school.
Right.
But subsequent to that, Terrebonne High in the current position or location opened 1940.
Right.
Fast forward 20 years, 1960, South Terrebonne opens.
1960.
Then in the early 70s, H.L. Bourgeois. In the late 80s, Eleanor High, which the 4 high schools we have now. They're 4 relatively large high schools. Terrebonne and H.L. Bourgeois are 5A, which is the largest ranking for athletics.
Right.
And South Terrebonne and Eleanor are 4A.
Right.
But those schools, like I said, Terrebonne High has served kids for generations, and all the other ones have obviously been making their contributions as time has gone by as well. Unfortunately, and I was talking about this with David before the show, that our bayou communities over the last 20, 30 years have been shrinking.
Right.
And you know, we all speculate on the reasons. I think it's a combination. As I told David when I first began in education 48 years ago, I taught in a bayou school. A large percentage of my kids, their parents were involved in the seafood, commercial fishing, or oil field. So we know what's happened with both of those.
That is correct.
So, you know, I think that has, and throw in hurricanes.
Right. Yeah, and
You know,
certainly
to all
that's
those
big
factors,
impact.
I think it's contributing to where we've had some migration out of those areas, and the bayou communities have been shrinking.
Yeah. So, David, we've got about a minute left for each of you to kind of wrap up. Tell us a little bit about some of that progression that we've seen
Okay,
now.
well, there are a couple of schools that don't exist now, but they were very important in the history of our area. We actually had St. Lucie Elementary and High School for African Americans.
Right.
We had St. Joseph Catholic High School in Chauvin opened in 58, and then we had St. Bernadette open in 61. We had St. Gregory open in 64. There was a large expansion in the 60s of Catholic schools. And then on September 1st, 1965, Homer Central Catholic High School opened, which took the girls from St. Francis and the boys from St. Francis Academy, put them on the current location, which is now Vanderbilt Catholic. It existed as Homer Central Catholic for 1 year. And then the following year, March 27, 1966, it was renamed from Father August Vanderbilt, who was longtime pastor of St. Francis Parish and a staunch supporter of Catholic education. And then we had other non-public schools join us. 1984, Homer Christian was founded by Pastor Rene Monet. 2002, Messiah Monastery School was founded by Dr. Jules Bouquet and his wife. Covenant Christian by First Baptist Church in 2007, and our latest non-public school in 2007, the E-Learning Academy opened.
And so, because it's so very important, I want people to find out more as we close the show, Philip. I want people to go and listen to what's going to be presented tomorrow, on the Thursday night, the 4th, as we continue with this education. Gentlemen, thank you both for joining us. I appreciate it very, very much.
Thanks for having us.
Appreciate it.
It's a pleasure.
All right, guys, that'll do it for this particular segment. Don't go anywhere. A lot more Bayou time when we continue.